All right, sir, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so this is one of my favorites. I really enjoy investigating cases. It's kind of a challenge for me that I just look forward to. There's a lot of different parts to investigations. One thing I tell our officers that are starting out is that every investigation really is the same. Whether I'm investigating a harassment or an assault, or I'm investigating a homicide. They all kind of work the same way. So we'll just go into a little bit of what we look for, what we do. I also have some examples of things we'll use on the street. I forgot my fingerprint kit in the car, but we can try and, I can show you a little bit about how that works as well. So really the goal of crime scene investigation is to recognize, document, collect evidence at the scene. It all starts with that first officer arriving on scene. We have what we call a pyramid of priorities, and evidence always comes last on the list, which only means that if my safety or the safety of someone else in the crime scene is in jeopardy, I'm not going to be concerned about preserving the evidence as much as I am about their safety. So if I accidentally kick a shell casing on the ground while I'm trying to put a tourniquet on or move somebody out of the way, that's okay. It happens. One of the priorities when we first arrive on scene is going to be to lock that scene down so we can start working on all this stuff. This is a principle of evidence collection. That whenever two objects come into contact with one another, a cross-transfer of physical evidence can occur, or will occur. But what that means is basically when two objects touch, there's always going to be a transfer of physical evidence. Whether that's skin cells, or oil from the hand, or what I had for lunch, there's going to be a transfer. And you could best see this principle demonstrated when you have a traffic accident, I think. When two cars collide, you're going to have some type of paint transfer. Or transfer of materials from the vehicles. That's why if we've got a hit and run, we'll look at the car that was hit, trying to document color, because the color of the car that hit is probably going to be on the victim vehicle. So the intensity, duration, and nature of the materials in contact really determine the extent of the transfer. Obviously, the longer or the two objects are in contact with each other, there's going to be more evidence transferred. So talking about evidence, there's direct evidence, which is firsthand observations, your eyewitness accounts, videos, confession, that type of stuff. You guys have probably heard circumstantial evidence term before. Eyewitness accounts, one of those direct evidence items, can be unreliable, to say the least. In fact, the Innocence Project, goodness sakes, the Innocence Project said that 80% of all wrongful convictions were a result of flawed eyewitness testimony, and the Innocence Project was a project that was implemented to try and clear people who may not have committed the crimes but were held based on faulty evidence or eyewitness accounts. So, as you guys have probably seen in everyday life, if you ask somebody what they saw, it's not going to be completely 100% accurate all the time. That's just the way that things work. But they can also be a great tool, especially with trained observers and somebody who knows what they're looking for. They're very, very beneficial. So what affects our observations? Well, we have information from our senses, what we actually pay attention to, and then our perception, what that's stored in short-term memory, and then our long-term memory. You know, as you guys know, if you haven't, if you're asked about a situation that you haven't experienced in a long time, it's going to be harder for you to recall the information. But also our perception and the way that we see the world, the lens through which we see the world, it really can affect what we see. And this is probably why sometimes you'll have officers, maybe be a little gruff with you on scene, because if you're telling us something, we see the world through a completely different lens. And it's nothing against you, it's nothing that's against the officer, but we see things through a different lens. I deal with I deal with crime on a daily basis, and I see things on a daily basis that you might not see. So I see things a little bit differently. Officers tend to become cynical because we see the bad in people all the time, right? But that's our perception, that's our worldview. Yours may be a little bit different, or maybe it's more the same depending on what you've experienced in your life. Then you see things, your life experience is going to be different than mine, and so I try to be empathetic in the way that I handle my police work, because I don't know what you know, and I don't know what you've experienced, and I may not know what triggers you either. Maybe this case is very important to you because your family has experienced this in the past, and to me it's like whatever, I just don't quite understand it. But I shouldn't say that on scene, right? I should try and see it through your worldview as much as I can, and that's where I think empathy in police work is very important. Putting myself in your shoes is very important as best that I can, because it's going to help me investigate better and also show the public that we do care. I just may have a different worldview, and I think that's really important for us to do. We've talked about this a little bit, but our perception is interpreting the information we received. It's skewed by emotion, state of mind, prior experiences. Perception also can be like a physical side effect too, where if I'm involved in a stressful situation, I have what we call perceptual narrowing. My stress is amped up and I get tunnel vision. I'm focused on one thing. If you interview a lot of people who've had guns pulled on them, they might be able to tell you in a lot of detail about the gun because that's what they were focused on, but they couldn't tell you what the person was wearing, they couldn't tell you how tall they were, all that. Officers experience that as well because we are human. We may have gone through some stressful situations that hopefully try and help us break free from that tunnel vision, but it doesn't always work. So we have to understand that if a victim or a witness tells us, I don't remember what they were wearing, well, there's actually a physiological reason behind that. There's an actual human response that they probably don't remember what the suspect was wearing. Okay, so talking about evidence continuing here, we have our circumstantial evidence. This is indirect evidence that can be used to imply a fact, but it doesn't necessarily prove it. We deal with a lot of this, like finding a glove with a suspect's initials. Well, it's good evidence, but it's circumstantial until we can corroborate it using other facts as well. So here's some other circumstantial evidence. Physical evidence, which is the actual things you can touch, synthetic fibers, bullet shell casings, all that stuff. And then biological evidence might be blood, body fluids, fibers, those types of things. Trace evidence is small but measurable amounts of physical or biological evidence. So a strand of hair, maybe some fingerprint, gunshot residue. Those are examples of trace evidence.
So how do you, if you collect trace evidence, do you have little bags you put it in, or if it's a strand of hair?
Sure. Yeah, bags, envelopes. We try not to package we don't package any type of biological evidence in plastic because the terrarium effect, if you will, right? If I seal something off completely in plastic and there's no way that it can breathe and have oxygen, it will eventually erode and degrade to the point where I can't use it. Mold can grow, things like that. So this is one reason why if we have a shirt that's got blood all over it, we'll actually hang it and dry it completely before we package it, but we'll also package it in a breathable container such as maybe a paper bag like this that you might, we could get them at the grocery store. I guess they probably don't use these much anymore in grocery stores, but our paper bags are going to be crucial for collecting and storing that type of evidence. You want to be careful about what you package though in paper. For example, if I package evidence at an arson scene in paper, that is going to eventually degrade to the point I can't use it as well, because gases and stuff will all leave, and that's actually evidence that I need to show accelerant or things like that. I wouldn't want to package a shirt with gasoline on it inside of a paper bag because it's going to erode and degrade to the point or evaporate where I can't use it. So for those types of things, I will package it inside of a sealed paint container or something where I can actually analyze what type of accelerant that is in a lab later on if I need to. This is probably kind of self-explanatory. The more circumstantial evidence there is, the more weight it holds. The glove with the initials of the suspect on it, in and of itself, that doesn't necessarily hold a lot of weight, but when I start coupling it with other things, that really helps out. A lot of this stuff is honestly way more in detail than we need to go, but basically we try to use evidence to exclude groups of suspects. So I might, if I found a certain type of blood on scene, it could help narrow my suspect pool to a smaller group. And we're constantly trying to do this in everything that we do. Whether it's clothing descriptions, whether it's height, weight, whatever the case may be, we try and narrow that suspect pool down as far as we can. But individual evidence, that narrows our suspects down to a single person or thing. For example, if I find a fingerprint, that is individual to the specific person. Handwriting is a good example. DNA it's actually really specific, but not as specific as fingerprints. It can last a little longer, but DNA, if, for example, I had a twin, could be to a point where they couldn't tell the difference between my twin and me. So I know DNA is all the rage and you see it in all the crime scene movies, but personally, I'd rather have a good, clear fingerprint than DNA evidence, because that is going to be specific to that person. And just like wear and tear on a shoe could be tied back to that specific shoe, the same thing with fingerprints too. If I have a scar across that print, that's going to be very telling. So fingerprints are great, and I want our officers to try and use that kind of stuff more and more versus relying on this new fad of DNA. I don't know that we get too much into it more in this class, so I'll talk about it now. The DNA database is very restrictive to what can go inside of it, whereas the fingerprint database is not as restrictive. So you guys have heard of CODIS and APHIS before. CODIS is like the DNA database. APHIS is the fingerprint database. In order to enter someone into CODIS with their DNA, they have to be a suspect, or they have to be the suspect in a crime. I can't just take DNA collected from all of you, throw it in the system, and say, "Tell me if this matches this evidence," or "Tell me if any of these people are felons," or whatever the case may be. They won't let me do that. I can't enter someone who I don't know is a suspect. So it's very, very specific to what I can do with CODIS. Now, what we can do is compare DNA samples. So if I collect DNA from a blood drop on the ground at my crime scene and I have a suspect identified, I can take that suspect's DNA with a search warrant or by consent and send it to a lab to compare the two and see if there's a match. But it's it's limited in what I can do that for, what types of crimes I can do that for. For example, property crimes. We see people all the time ask if we can run DNA comparisons on a rock thrown through a window of their car, or whatever the case is. And it's frustrating for us because you guys see that on NCIS or CSI, whatever, and they do it all the time, but we can't do that. There are so many property crimes and so much work that our lab here in Colorado has to do. They won't process property crimes unless it reaches a certain threshold. So if I'm looking at millions of dollars in damage, I could probably call up to the lab at CBI and say, hey, this is what I've got. Can I sit down for a meeting with you guys to try and figure out if this is something you'd be able to help us with? And more than likely, they'll try and work it in. But if it's a small level crime, they're just not going to look at it. And it's not that they don't want to try and help, it's that there's just too many other large crimes that they have to handle.
But you'll still collect evidence, right?
I still will, and the reason...
So can that be used if anything else comes up? Because
Yes.
we talk about weed as a gateway drug. Well, I think stealing things is kind of a gateway
Sure.
to other things. So is there like a notebook? I mean, for lack of a better term.
So, for example, this is one I like to use all the time. Car theft. Okay, so if somebody steals your car in the morning, and because you left it running, which you're not supposed to do, please don't do that.
If it's
anybody-
remote start, you can.
If it's remote start, you can, if you have those types of devices on your car. But if you leave the keys in your 1991 Toyota Camry because it doesn't have remote start and it gets stolen, okay? It's recovered in another part of town, and it was a recent steal, and I know that this is probably, there's still DNA on the steering wheel, the gear shift, the door handle, whatever the case is. I'm still going to collect it, because if I develop a suspect, then I could try and get a search warrant for that suspect's DNA and start running comparisons. And I'd want to confirm that, hey, that suspect, you don't know him, never had access to your car, should have never been in your car. Okay, now I've got a little bit more to go on, and I could probably send that, potentially send that up to CBI for a comparison, depending on their caseload and what we talk about in our meetings. But yeah, I'll still collect it. Kind of like fingerprint. I may not get a full-fledged fingerprint, but I might get a partial. I'll still try and collect it. So we should be trying to do that on our crimes, is collect it, then I have it, and it's not gone forever. Not every agency does that, though. It just kind of depends on where you're at. I know that some agencies are just not big on doing this collection of like a gear swab, or gear shift swab, door handle swab, or something like that. Vehicles can be difficult to process when it comes to fingerprints because of the porous surfaces or the textured surfaces inside of a vehicle, like on a dash or a steering wheel. Those can limit us too. But yes, we do try and collect evidence that we can, that way if we develop something down the road, we can use it.
What was the database called for fingerprints?
APHIS?
What is that?
So, I didn't really go into that, did I? Thank you. So it's just automatic,
AFIS?
yes,
AFIS.
yes. I think it's automated fingerprint identification system, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a database of fingerprints. So with that database, I can put any fingerprint in there. I can actually take a fingerprint from you and send it up to CBI and say, hey, can you run this through APHIS and see if we have any matches? And they will give me a match if there was one. So there's a lot larger database for fingerprints, which is why I strongly recommend our officers, if we can, to try and collect fingerprint evidence. The problem with fingerprint evidence is it's messy, and it does take a little bit of skill, a little bit of practice, and you have to be confident in your ability to do what you can with that. There's a lot of different techniques for gathering the fingerprint evidence, so I can dust for prints like you see in the movies, but before I lift that print, I should try and take photographs of what I've dusted on whatever surface it is. Then I can try and lift it. If I choose to, I can even take DNA evidence from that fingerprint. So I can dust for fingerprint, take a photograph of it, try and lift it, and then also swab that door for DNA as well, or that surface for DNA as well. But you've got to make sure you do it in the right order, because if I swab for DNA first, clearly I'm going to mess up the fingerprint. So you have to do it in the right order.
So if you get your fingerprints taken to apply for a job, does that go to the database too?
Sometimes, to my knowledge, like especially if it's done by the state, it should go into that database, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not 100% certain on how they go into all that, because I know for your driver's license, right? You got to put your fingerprint down there, and that should go into that database if I'm not mistaken. It does. But I know for a fact that if you are a suspect in a crime and you're refusing to identify yourself, I could have somebody with a fingerprint scanner, which we have some of those available in the Valley. I think State Patrol is the only agency that I know, and he gives us a fake name. Of State Patrol come out, verify that, and 99.9 times out of 100, it's not his brother, it's him or her. So the fingerprint system is really nice to be able to use that. Yes?
When mine were taken when I got hired, do they get sent?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, so you're in the system.
Can't get away with
Don't be
this.
committing any crimes.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of career fields that will require those to go up. So I'm just not sure if that's 100% across the board. So I don't want to give you false information, but I don't. As far as I know, if you're doing fingerprints on a fingerprint card that says Colorado Bureau of Investigation on the top of it, it's going in the system.
Mortgage
many different
lenders.
jobs, only one.
Mortgage lenders. Yeah, right. Bankers.
So the importance of evidence, obviously, it can prove that a crime has been committed, set the scene for a further investigation. It's something that we use in interrogations or interviews. It can back up witness testimony. It can link a suspect with a victim or a crime scene. Oh, I wasn't there. Well, the evidence shows that you were. We just talked about confirming identity of people associated with crime, and it helps us to reconstruct a crime. So there's some really, really, really amazing people with evidence collection and crime scene reconstruction. I've had the opportunity to go to quite a few classes with them, and it's just amazing the work that these people have done and how good they are at their job. I went to a death investigation, violent crimes death investigation class. It was hosted by, I believe his name is Shepard, but he worked for Pennsylvania State Police, and he was instrumental in setting up the Amber Alert system throughout the United States. He also pretty much started the very first behavioral analysis unit. Have you guys ever seen, what's the name of the show?
Criminal Minds.
Criminal Minds, through the FBI. So according to him, this is coming from him in his class, I don't know how true this is, but he said that the Pennsylvania State Police actually were like the pilot program, and the FBI saw how great it was and picked it up, and that's how their behavioral analysis unit actually got started. So anyways, he put together this class on death investigations, and it was just phenomenal how he and his team break down a crime scene, whether it's organized or unorganized, what that tells them about the suspect, and then how they can use that to interrogate him. To the point where he's saying, well, this is a disorganized crime scene, so this person has to be, well, they're definitely not narcissist, because a narcissist has a very, very controlled crime scene. And so that tells me when I interview this suspect that I have to behave a certain way. And he just changes his investigation or his interrogation techniques based on who that person is as a, narcissist or whatever. If they're a narcissist, then he lets them kind of feel like they're running the show, because that's very important to them, and they think they're smarter than him. And just a really, really amazing guy, and his whole team, just amazing people. I guess they've taken old cases like deaths which is where somebody just dies in their home or somewhere, but there's no one around to see what happened. Suicides, or cases that have been deemed suicides, and they reopened all these cases. By looking at the photographs that were taken by the officers and the investigators, they build profiles, and they've actually turned over a lot of cases that were deemed suicides, cases that were deemed homicides that probably weren't. They've just done a whole lot of really good work with that. So there's a lot of people a lot smarter out there than me, but it's pretty neat to see how these investigators truly use evidence and their understanding, knowledge of people to help solve crimes. No, we're not going to go into all of this. Okay, so I talked earlier about the first officer on scene and his role or her role being very important. The first one on scene is primarily going to make sure that the scene is secure and safe, and then requesting backup police, whatever they think they might need. Medics, obviously, that's going to be extremely important because our number one priority is to keep people safe, keep people alive. So evidence comes last in this situation. Whatever.
Is there a DA there too?
Sometimes we will, yes.
How often does that happen?
If we feel that the crime is going to require the assistance of their office with regards to search warrants, or some tricky stuff involving like search and seizure, primarily search warrant stuff, we'll ask them to come out, or they'll make the call to come out too. We have them come out on clear-cut homicides because we know that that's going to be a big investigation. So usually we want them to come out, go through the scene with us, kind of see what we're seeing, and they're really good about trying to make sure that they're, obviously not tampering with evidence or watching where they step and those types of things. So, but yeah, we do have them come out.
So it's not, does it have to be the district attorney or
No.
just somebody out of his office?
Yeah, just somebody out of his office. However, if it's depending on the level of crime, like a homicide, you're probably going to have one of the top
Right.
district attorneys come out.
So is there always one on call? Like,
They have an on-call schedule, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and they love it when we wake them up early in the morning. For the warrants.
Yeah.
Just like anybody who's on call loves being called out, right? But yeah, they do have an on-call the district attorney. Sometimes the district attorney's investigator will come out as well because they have a police officer certified working with their office to help follow up stuff. He'll come out and help us out too. We don't really have a medical examiner down here, but our coroner, Bob Fowler, I'm sure you all know him. He's very, very knowledgeable when it comes to death investigations. So he will also assist. The way that we look at any crime scene where there's a deceased person is that we have the crime scene and the coroner owns the body. So they're in charge of the body, we are in charge of the crime scene. But we work closely hand in hand with them to make sure that everybody's covering their bases and we're doing things right. Here in La Junta, we have a very unique opportunity as line level police officers to investigate crime scenes from start to finish. In a big city, your officer that's been on the street a year is not going to be the one that helps or investigates the case all the way through. We have a really unique opportunity out here to actually be able to do that. I know 3 years on, I was investigating, 2 or 3 years on, I investigated like my first major case, major homicide. And I was telling a friend of mine about it that works with Aurora PD, and he's like, "They let you do that? We don't have anybody else, man." So it's a really cool opportunity. I think it's awesome. It just gives us a lot of well-rounded experience. At the same time, we have Colorado Bureau of Investigation, who is more than willing to help us, and that's actually what they are designed to do. They help out smaller agencies like this that don't have a detective or enough personnel to be able to follow through these cases all the way to the end, and they're usually very, very experienced. I know one of my favorites to work with at CBI is Joe Samoski. He's got like 20 years experience with Colorado Springs, like major crimes unit. I don't exactly know what he did up there, but I know it was a lot of homicide investigations, violent crime investigations. And I love when they come down because I'm like, teach me everything you know, and they really are willing to do that. They're also very, very good about saying, hey, this is your guys' case. We're just here to help you. So in a lot of those crime scene movies you see, or shows, you see when the feds come in, everybody's like, oh, the feds are here, and the feds want to take it over. This is my crime scene, and there's a lot of arguing. I've never experienced that down here. Real life application, these guys are there to help us, and vice versa, we can learn a lot from them, so.
So is every La Junta police officer trained in investigation, or just if you want to be, or?
We all are.
We all
are. Now, there's some of us who've gone through a lot more training than others. Obviously, our guys that are fresh out of the academy don't have as much training or experience as people who've been on the street for a while. But we all have crime scene class we take in the academy. And then from there, through your field training program, when our officers first get out of the academy, they go through a 3-month field training program, at least 3-month field training program, that they ride with a more experienced officer who basically critiques everything they do, assists them in learning the reality, the difference between academy and what happens on the street. So for example, me, I've gone through a lot of the trainings on investigations and death investigations and just investigations in general. So I try to impart that knowledge on my trainee when we're working on the street. Okay, we've got a property crime. Let's get our fingerprint kit. Let's, swab for DNA. Here's how we're gonna do that. Here's how we package it. And most of the stuff that I teach them, or that any of our training officers teach them, is stuff they've learned in the academy, but it's like, hey, this is actually like real life application. So we may not have a dedicated photographer or evidence person like you see in the movies where they're saying, oh, you do photos, you do evidence, right? We kind of just do it all. But it does help to have somebody that's designated to do that. If we have enough manpower, we'll try and separate that beast as a team. So.
Then do you all get together back at the station to put the report together, or is there one key person that does all the?
Yeah, so you're going to have your primary investigator who should be kind of making sure that everything is coming together and working as it should. A lot of times on these major cases, that'll be a big part of what CBI does for us because those guys are just experienced in it. But yeah, we try and corroborate and make sure that everything is where it needs to be. Hey, did you get that house? Did you talk to the owner? Did you interview them? Okay, no, well, we need to go back and do that. And, we'll have our maps with check marks on the houses that we've talked to and our neighborhood canvas of witnesses done and all of that. So yeah, we really try and work together to make sure that there's no gaps in the investigation and that everything's been taken care of that needs to be. And then the hours and hours and hours spent in front of a computer typing it all out. Because if it's not in your report, it didn't happen. And when this case goes to trial in a year, 2, 3, 4 years, you better have it well documented. So try and do a little overkill on those, especially the major cases. So the 7 S's of crime scene investigation: first, secure the scene. First officer on scene, we're gonna lock it down, try and secure it as best we can. That's where this comes into place. We'll, cordon off the area, get some additional officers to sit on the perimeter if we need to. Our reserve officers help out big time with that. They're volunteer, come in, hey, I need you to make sure nobody comes into the crime scene. So that the road officers, the regular full-time officers, can do what they need to do. We want to separate witnesses, which can be difficult. because probably before you got there, everybody's been talking. And nowadays too, right? Everybody's on their phone, everything's been videotaped. So we want to separate witnesses. Why do you think we want to do that?
They're all gonna tell you a different story.
They might,
And they all see things different.
Yeah.
right? And also,
They can't.
They might have been in a
we
different
don't want them
area.
to collaborate. Yeah. And that's the word that I meant to say, not corroborate earlier.
Collaborate.
When we get back to the office and we collaborate. Thank you. But yeah, we don't want them to collaborate, and that's a big problem when we're investigating a crime, is that everybody's already talked to each other and they'll tell you what happened and you're like, did you see that? Well, no, but my sister. And then you go talk to her. She goes, well, I didn't see it, but I heard it from, and pretty soon you're like, okay, well, who actually saw this? You know, I'm trying to get to the source here because I need their information. So we want to separate witnesses, which it also can be really difficult because when you have a big incident where, like, say there's a homicide and the family has witnessed it, it's really hard to do that in a time of crisis because they need to be there for each other, but you also have to make sure that you're investigating this thoroughly. So getting people to understand that I've got to do this because I care about your family and care about your case. It doesn't seem like it right now, but I've got to have you guys in separate rooms. So that could be a difficult thing. Then we want to scan the scene and see the scene. There's differences. I want to do my walkthrough and kind of look and see what I see, but then I really want to, like, sit back and see the scene, if you will. Not just, oh, there's evidence there, but try and picture how this happened or how that could have got there. Take kind of a 30,000 foot view versus my close-up initial response. And coming from a guy who's gone to scenes as the primary and then been the lead on the investigation afterwards, that can be a difficult thing to do because you go in and there's been a homicide and guns are drawn and life is in jeopardy and you're searching for a bad guy, and then you find bad guy or you deem the scene safe, and now it's like, okay, I've got to stop looking at this little part of it and really open my eyes to the bigger picture, and that can be a difficult thing to do too. Which is why it's also really helpful to have someone who wasn't there right away kind of take over or help investigate, because like any situation, if you're in the middle of it, sometimes it helps to have a friend on the outside telling you, hey, did you think about this? Or maybe you need to think about that. We want to sketch the scene, which can get pretty involved. Nowadays, you don't see the sketches like you used to in maybe the 80s or the 70s or whatever. They didn't have the technology back then that we do now. So sketches are great, but nowadays we can put what they call, they have a tool called a Pharaoh. CBI is the only one that I know of in our area that has one, but it's a really expensive fancy machine. It kind of sits on a tripod like your camera there. You put it in the middle of the room, you walk out and let it do its thing for 10 minutes, and it takes a digital scan of that room. It measures distances, it takes into account every item in that room and documents location, the size of the room. It's really, really impressive. And seeing some of the Pharaoh videos that they have, it's just mind-blowing how much technology's come. We're also using drones for that now too. I know, like, the vehicular crimes, CSP, Colorado State Patrol, their officer who responds to fatal or serious bodily injury crashes has a drone they can throw up that does all that stuff too. Just a lot of expensive program work, but.
Is the closest CBI office Pueblo?
Yes, yep. But they have an amazing response time. You call them, they'll be here quick. It's pretty amazing. But we do want to at least document location of evidence, bodies, whatever the case may be, and where that is, so I can recreate it if I need to in a courtroom or maybe even in an interview with my suspect. Then that real good search for evidence could be as much as we've got to 9mm shell casing from a handgun on the floor. Now I've got to find the bullet hole. So good luck. But that could be a difficult thing. But our search for evidence is really detailed. And then we're going to secure and collect it. So not only do I notice the 9mm shell casing, but I'm going to probably put a tent, like one of the little A-frame tents on the ground with a number or a letter on it to document where it's at. And then I'll take pictures around the room of where all this evidence is located. And I'll take my distance photo, a little bit closer photo, and then a real good close-up of that evidence. We document where it's all at, then we start collecting it. And that collecting process can be a little bit tedious, especially if you've got a big scene or a lot of evidence. Because really what I'll do is you are my evidence log person, or my scribe, and I'm the evidence collection guy, and we have a guy with a camera, so we'll make sure we get good photos. We're gonna document on the log where we found it, what we collected, and what item number it is, and then we bag it, tag it, and take it away. So it can be a very tedious process. Already just making sure the scene is safe and secure, and hopefully we preserve evidence. It can be a little bit more difficult though, preserving evidence if you have an outdoor crime scene. I went to a class by CBI where they talked about crime scene investigation for basic investigator, and they showed a lot of, well, primarily what they showed was cases that they've investigated. So it was kind of cool because you got real life cases that you were looking at, not just some fake, made up case. And so they were showing us one homicide investigation. It was like a multiple person homicide, and how it was in the mountains. When they arrived on scene, it was like 50 degrees and sunny, but a storm was moving in, and so they're trying just as fast as they possibly can to gather as much evidence, information before the snow hits. And by the next morning, when the rest of the team arrived, there's 2 feet of snow on the ground. So your outside crime scenes are very difficult to process because you got to make sure that you're looking at weather and all sorts of different things that can affect that. Time in the sunlight, all that stuff. Yep, we already talked about this. Witnesses, scanning the scene. A little bit more here. Your investigator should be looking for where to take photos if we have secondary crime scenes. A secondary crime scene could be like, I have my house where the homicide took place. The suspect goes and gets into a vehicle, and they drive to another location and get out there before they're arrested. Well, how many crime scenes do I have? Technically, I have like 3, and everything in between, right? The roadway, the route they took. So that's what you should be doing as you scan the scene. Like, okay, we need to find that car. We need to get that locked down. We need to make sure that we look everywhere along the route that they took, because we could have dumped evidence, whatever the case may be. So a crime scene investigation can take a lot. Usually it's best if one person collects packages and transports the evidence into a secure locker. That way everything's clean. A lot of times what we'll see though is, and this isn't wrong, but a lot of times CBI will send their crime scene unit down. So they have investigators like Joe Smosky, who I was talking about, but they also have a crime scene unit that aren't necessarily law enforcement officers, but they work for CBI, and they do all of that cool CSI stuff. They package it, they get everything ready to go. They'll put together an evidence log for me, and then they'll say, okay, you're with LJPD, you're collecting the evidence. I'll say, yep, so sign here. I'll sign for all the evidence they collected and bagged, and then I take it to the police department. And we maintain our own evidence. So if CBI comes down to do a crime scene for us to process one, I'll take the evidence and I'll store it at Lahana PD. Then if I have anything that needs to be sent to their laboratory, I'll put together the request, and then we'll transfer those specific items to their laboratory.
When you store that at the Lahana PD, do you have a special area, but is there a combo or some security code to get in there?
Oh yeah, yes. So once I collect the evidence and package it, I bring it to the police department. I'll put it in our evidence collection system. We use a computerized system that has like barcodes and all sorts of stuff. I'll make sure I slap all those labels on my bags and that everything's in order. And then I put it into a temporary storage locker. And once I lock the padlock on that storage locker, no one can access it except for our evidence custodian. So our evidence custodian will then come in, take custody of it, and move it to a permanent evidence storage area that only that custodian and any assistant custodian has access to. And that's very well monitored because chain of custody is huge. As you guys have seen down here recently, there's been some issues with that. No, I don't want to call anybody out, but there has been in recent times some issues with that, and you guys have seen how that could affect a case, and so something we want to be very, very careful about.
Is the evidence custodian a member of the Lahana Police Department, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we have them. They're employed by us, and
But they're
they
not
come.
necessarily an officer on the street, correct?
Doesn't necessarily have to be, but you should probably have an officer overseeing that position, just because we are dealing with crime scene evidence. So, but a lot of places don't have evidence custodians that are, or evidence processing techs that are law enforcement. I mean, it's just, like I said, even CBI, their evidence crime scene team, they're not all law enforcement, so.
In that area, are there cameras in there too that watch that room?
We have cameras at the police department, but there's nothing specifically in that room. So, I mean, that could be a tool, I guess, for you. But there's a lot of checks and balances that go into it anyways with, like I said, our barcode system and periodic audits and all that stuff that help to make sure that none of that stuff is going anywhere that it shouldn't be. Well, okay, one other thing I just wanted to say here, like I said before, you guys have kind of seen this in recent times, but if there's an issue with your evidence handling, it could mean that that evidence is not admissible in court, which would be a really big deal. Could make or break a case. So that's just a big thing. We want to make sure that it is admissible and that everything is handled correctly. This is just a little bit about what we might do for taking a controlled sample. So control samples are also taken from the victim for purposes of exclusion from the suspect pool. What that means is if I have a crime scene where somebody broke into a house and they put their handprint on a window to slide the window open and then get inside, I want to make sure I also get control samples from the homeowner or anyone else that might have touched that window or had access to that window. That way I can send samples to CBI and say, hey, here's the bag, or here's the handprint, here's the person that lives there. So if those two match, that's not my guy. And they're done with DNA samples and all of that as well. As you can see here, we call this a buccal swab, or a swab of the inside of the mouth. I'll take control samples if I'm doing DNA collection of my victims or anybody that had access to that scene, so that I can show that these people are not the ones you should be looking at. Next, analyzing the evidence. So CBI's got a really, really cool certified laboratory. I've gotten the opportunity to take a tour of it when I was down at Pueblo for that crime scene class that I was talking about. I went up and talked to one of the agents, well, Joe Samoski. Like I said, one of my favorites, working with him is good. I said, hey, show me everything that you guys got. And so he took me back there, and it's really very amazing. When you see the CSI movies and shows, that's kind of what it looks like on the inside. And so they can do a lot of really cool stuff. However, we're not getting DNA results back in 15 minutes. We're not, having dedicated people to do all that stuff for us, right? They've got a whole bunch of different agencies that they take care of. So it takes some time, but they've got a really good team of people down there that help us out quite a bit, and they're pretty neat. They've got ballistics areas where you fire the gun into the water vat and take the casing and the projectile itself, and you can compare the different striations from different guns. So I can take a shell casing fired out of the suspect's gun, and if I were able to collect that suspect's gun later on, I'd send it to CBI and say, hey, can you compare the casing and the tool marks on this casing with what comes out of that gun? And it's amazing where they'll actually be able to do that.
Is there only one CS or CBI lab in the state, or is there more?
There's more.
Oh,
Grand Junction, I believe, has a lab, and then Denver's got some stuff as well. So, but they process that for all these small agencies in the state. Now, there's also forensics labs with some of your major departments, like Denver PD probably has their own stuff. They don't release. Colorado Springs Police Department, they process a lot of their own stuff. So, but it's pretty cool to see what you can do, especially nowadays with the shell casings. I think that's amazing that you could take the suspect's shell casing and compare it with one fired out of the suspect's gun, and they're going to have tool marks that match up, and you can use that in court to show that was the gun that fired that, projectile, casing, whatever. There's a national database for that stuff as well called NIBIN, the National something ballistics. I'm not sure, I can't remember what it all stands for now, but it's a ballistics database. So we have like a drive-by shooting that happens here in Lahana. I'll take some casings from that shooting, I'll send it up to CBI and say, hey, can you compare this with anything you have in NIBIN? And they might say, hey, we got a match for the same thing up in Denver, or Springs or whatever. So they can show how those match up and possibly help me develop a suspect based on that. You had a question?
So are guns like fingerprints?
Pretty much in many ways.
They're all different?
All,
they're not all
yeah.
the same? Okay.
Every gun is going to fire a little bit differently, have a little bit different tool mark. You might find some that are pretty close, but just like fingerprints, you're going to compare them and yeah, you'd be able to tell. So now that can get a little difficult if you have a projectile that's fired and mangled to the point where you can't tell, the striations on that projectile to what was fired at the lab. But a lot of really cool stuff they can do. We also do like all of our processing of blood when we get a DUI down here. If we arrest somebody on a DUI, I send the blood, if that's what the person chooses to take as a blood test, to CBI. They'll run it process it for us and tell us how much alcohol is in the blood and stuff like that. So a lot of cool stuff there. Some crime scene reconstruction. We talked a little bit about this in the past, or earlier with my class that I was telling you about, the guy from Pennsylvania who reconstructs crime scenes for a living. But basically it's just gonna kind of help us know the events of what happened and what, if I've got a body on a mattress, what does the blood tell me? Is it smeared? Is it droplets? Is it splatter on the wall? Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So I build this crime scene reconstruction, and it can tell us a lot about what happened, where the person was. So of course there's legal considerations, because we're talking about Fourth Amendment stuff. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. So I have to make sure that I'm doing everything by the book. So that's why it's always good to involve the district attorney's office, because if I've got to get a search warrant, then they need to be involved in making sure that that's done correctly and that I'm asking for the right things to search for, and I'm not just blanket requesting everything in the house or whatever the case may be. So it's not really hard to get a search warrant. If you've got evidence that there's a crime there, I mean, it's pretty simple. Like if I've got a homicide inside of a house, I'm gonna be able to get a search warrant for that. There's a person that's dead, there's holes in the body that shouldn't be there. Whatever the case may be, I should have enough evidence to get into that house. So it's not really hard, it's just knowing how to craft it and making sure it's done right. So there are certain situations where we can do a warrantless search of a residence or property. Emergency circumstances where there's an immediate danger to life or limb. This might be something where I'm outside the house and I hear screaming coming from inside, you know, stop, that hurts, don't hurt me, or, you know, I'm hearing gunshots or something like that inside the house. That might give me that emergency, that exigency as we call it, to kick the door in or to enter the house without requesting a search warrant, because I believe that somebody is in the process of being hurt and we need to stop it now. There used to be exception for immediate danger of the loss or destruction of evidence. However, that has recently changed. So if I'm searching for drugs and I believe there's drugs in this house and I hear the toilet flushing because somebody's not wanting to go to prison for a really long time, that does not give me exigency to enter the house anymore. It used to be something, but not anymore. And basically, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the courts have ruled that it's not worth somebody getting hurt over evidence, property, things. I don't know how that would apply if there was like a homicide and I felt somebody was destroying evidence, because to me that's a little bit more serious. I'm not sure exactly how that works. This has really recently changed, so I'd have to look into that. We just had our legal update class where a lawyer comes in and talks to us about current, recent changes, and that was one thing that we weren't quite sure on. So, but I kind of have to say I agree, right? I don't want to rush into a house to try and stop a guy from flushing meth down the toilet and potentially get myself hurt over that. It's just property, and drugs and property, they're not worth the life of me or any of my officers or any of you for that matter. You know what I mean? I want you guys to be safe and all of us to go home. So also probable cause, a search of a person or their immediate property in conjunction with a lawful arrest. This is what we call a search incident to arrest. So if I arrest you and you have property on you, I am allowed to search all of your property and your person. Consent is another thing. There are some exceptions, like the probable cause part here, where motor vehicles fall into that. I was talking earlier about how a vehicle is mobile, so the lawmakers recognize that because it's mobile, I have a little more leeway when it comes to getting into that vehicle and searching without needing to get a search warrant. But search warrant's always a safe bet. Yes. So, my fingerprint kit has seen better days, but it'll get the job done. Let me get something I can see. I don't know how I can make this. So I've got my brush here. This is the latent print powder, just silk black powder. Some of them are like magnetic, which you can reuse. This is not one of those that you can really reuse, but it'll work just fine for this.
You take your wife's makeup brush and
Yeah. Oh, she would be mad because this is messy. So I'll just kind of, I don't need a whole lot, but I'll dab it around in there. And then I'll take the object that I'm trying to fingerprint and I'll just kind of brush it. I don't need too much.
what if the cup had been black?
So it wouldn't show up very well, but it would still work. I could lift it and put it on a piece of white paper.
Now, can you put too much on?
Yeah,
Or
that's
too
why-
rough and disturb it?
You probably won't disturb it too much, especially if I'm just doing it like this, but you can put too much on to the point where it's more difficult to see. It's almost like I could overwhelm it. You know, if I take my thumb on an ink pad and I push it on a piece of paper, if I overdid it, it's not going to show up as well as if it was just lightly. But you could start to see already a beautiful fingerprint. I promise I won't use in anything else,
When they
okay?
knock on your door and they're arresting you, Nancy.
So, try to lift it, I would want to photograph that fingerprint to see if I could get a good detail of the print. The other thing that I would want to do is put a scale or a photography scale up against it, which is basically like a ruler to show the dimensions. If I don't show dimensions, they're not going to be able to use it in the APHIS system.
So Nancy, your fingerprint will be in the APHIS system.
Set on styrofoam. But that's actually coming out.
Oh, that's how you lift it. Because I've always heard the lift a fingerprint, but I didn't know how they did it.
So I take my fingerprint card, get it ready, and then this is kind of special tape. It's like, I mean, kind of like packing tape, but a little different. And I would start on one end, trying not to mess the print up. I just come over. This is going to be really difficult to do.
I was wondering how you're going to do that with gloves and styrofoam.
Yeah, especially on a curved surface. So that makes it really difficult, like a door handle or like the round ones that you see on your house. Okay, but I have my photograph that I already took with my scale. So worst case scenario, at least I have that.
So lifting fingerprints was probably very important before cell phone cameras.
Yeah, or cameras in general. Any camera can be used. The cell phone camera is nice because it fits in my pocket, but realistically, the detectives back in the day would just use 35 millimeter camera with a really good lens on it, and you could do the same thing. But I'll lift it.
Oh my sakes.
Yes. Good work.
He does know what he's doing.
That's amazing.
Detective kit when he was little.
So, did you get a good one of it?
Yeah.
Did you?
Of
Did
texture.
you get this, Adrian?
That's going to be very, very difficult to get anything off of it. But my thought is I could still give it a shot. I mean, worst case scenario, I get your car dirty, and I can't get a print.
Oh, we've already.
Best case scenario,
it's
I might
already
get
been around.
something.
You guys
So.
know.
So there's a lot of really cool applications for what we call oblique lighting, which just means like taking my flashlight, instead of pointing it directly at what I'm trying to look at, I just turn it to the side. But I can pick up fingerprints on glass with oblique lighting, and we could try it on a car or something too. But if you see right here, there's a tire impression. But if I'm looking directly at it, I won't be able to see the tire impression as well as I can if I turn the light down, and you can see the ridge detail pop out. And now you can start to see all of my tire impressions.
We're gonna check out all of our properties now.
Right? So if you see the officer get down like this, even during the daylight, you're probably looking at, he's trying to find ridge detail on your tire impression. I'm going to use this car over here, which is probably involved in criminal activity. But if I'm looking directly at the car, I won't be able to see as much as I can if I turn my flashlight. Sorry, I'm not trying to blind people. To the side, you can see a lot more. So if I had a fingerprint right here, I can actually
See the ridges?
Yep. And I probably won't even need to dust
this
this.
way.
I probably won't even need to dust this.
Yeah.
I would just take a photograph like that.
And if you put it straight on?
Yeah.
Way different.
So this actually turned out a little bit better without oblique lighting. But say I had this car, well, I'm trying to think of a good example. If my fingerprint had been there for a week and she'd been driving around in her car through dust and dirt and everything like that, this wouldn't show up as well as it is now because it's going to be covered. So that's where if I turn the flashlight to the side, it's actually going to show up a lot better.
Kind of a flashlight then, right?
Nope.
No.
All I'm doing
You can
is
use your phone,
just
too.
turning
You're kidding me.
the light to the side.